In today's video, we're going to go over how to work with TileMapLayers, TileSets, terrains, you name it, and we're going to work on building our first level. Hi, my name is Michael. Join me as we build an epic Metroidvania game in Godot 4 using GD script. This is the Metroidvania Forge. Hi everybody, welcome to the latest episode. So what we're going to be covering today is kind of the basics that we need to create a level, and that is how to work with the tile map layer. And so a tile map layer is a special node that allows us to draw tiles on the grid. It's what I used to demonstrate in the previous video, and many of you are familiar with the tile map layer. It is a node that replaced what used to be used in Godot, which was the tile map, what was it? Oh yeah, just regular tile map, okay. And so we're going to be using this new tile map layer. Don't use tile map, it's deprecated at this point. You could use one, it would still work. And if you have an old project and bring it in, it still works as well. There's support for it currently. But this tile map layer is also going to require that we set up a tile set. So the tile set is like the Legos, and the tile map layer is like the board that we're going to place them onto. And once we get all that set up, we'll add our player in and we'll be able to just start playing around with our first level. So if you've got something to drink, Mountain Dew sponsorship, maybe, hit me up, or maybe I'll send you an invoice. Let's go ahead and crack that and let's get started. All right, in particular, what we need to do in this video is just a couple simple steps. And first, we're going to prep like the new level scene that we're going to be working on. We've got an existing playground scene and we can use that, but I think it's time that we start retiring that concept a little bit. Keep it around for other fun things you want to test, but we'll make our first maybe proper level. And then we'll create a TileSet resource next. And that resource, like I mentioned, is like the Lego kit, right? Which is going to have a reference to and bring in that sprite sheet that we've been creating and we worked on in our last videos. So we'll create this new TileSet resource, and then we're going to configure it so that it's cut up and ready for us to use for when we create our first tile map layer, which is step 4, right? That tile map layer, we'll add this TileSet, we'll draw around with it, we'll look at the features that it has, we'll add a player to our level, test it out, and cover a few more concepts and important aspects of our tile map layers that will help you as you create your own levels. So what we'll do here is I'm going to go ahead and in my file system, in my resources, let's create a new place for these levels to live and a place for us to store and keep track of all of our TileSet resources. So I'm going to just right click on the resource folder and create a new folder, and I'm going to call it levels. Now, I'm going to put a lot of stuff eventually within this levels folder, but for now, I'm going to create an additional folder underneath it. I'm going to just call this one TileSets. Okay, now the TileSets folder, I'm going to add yet another folder for the sprites. Okay, we've got a few things here going on. And before we get to that prepping scenes or anything, let's go ahead and just bring in the sprite resource that we need. So if you've exported a sprite sheet, then go ahead and put that in that folder. Or if you want to use the one that I'm providing on the itch.io page, linked in the description, then go ahead and download, unzip that file, and we'll bring that in. And I'm going to use that one. So let me go ahead and open this folder. Let's see, open in File Manager. And then I need to also open that download folder. Okay, so here I've got my Chapter 2 World Building Foundation zip file, unzipped, unpacked, and ready to go here. And the only asset we're going to need right now is this Forgotten Forest tile set, or of course the tile set that you've made. So I'm going to just copy that over to my sprites folder here. And then when we come back into Godot, it should now be here, imported, part of your project and ready to go. Okay, so let's also go ahead in our levels folder and let's create a place for this first level that we're going to work on. If you want to do this in the playground, you can, but I just don't recommend that because I think this is a good exercise. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder here. And you don't necessarily need a new folder for your levels, but I like to create a folder that groups them. So I'm going to label this with 00 because these are like my initial little bits of level, and I'm going to call it the forest. Okay, this is if we were to look at my map, I'm a 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 map. Oh boy, that was stupid. Okay, so here's my map, right? I'm going to be working on like these screens to start. So I'm going to call that like 01 forest, okay? And then maybe we've got 02 is my dungeon, and 03 would be my, or 01, I don't know, whatever, my castle. Okay, this way I can group the level scene files and just make it a little bit easier to organize. Really is all I'm doing here. Okay, so within the forest, I'm going to create a new scene, and this will be just a node 2D, so the root type 2D scene is fine. And you can come up with any kind of name you want, but I'm going to stick with a numbering convention. And I like to start with a 0 because if you get into the double digits and you start to have like, 10, then if you had 1 and then 10, then, your ordering gets kind of funny, right? Or actually a better example is if you have 9 and then the next level is 10, 10 is going to appear before 9 because it starts with a 1 and 9 is bigger than 1. So anyways, 0, 1. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and just create 0, 1 scene. It's here as a child of forest. It's going to open it up. It's a simple node 2D. And this is going to be our level. And it looks like I've got my grids and stuff turned off. So I don't remember when I did that. Show viewport, show origin, guides. I'll leave that on. Rulers. I don't know that I'll use the rulers, but there they are. Okay, cool. And now you know about that, right? You can hide these things or show them as needed. But this is going to be our basic level. And this is where we're going to drop in our tile map and, just start building this world. And one advantage to having separate levels in this, traditional style game is it makes the loading of levels pretty simple and straightforward because you don't have to worry about caching and like preloading assets for areas that you're about to enter. That's a cool topic and something that would be fun to do in a lot of projects. And it's required for bigger 3D projects, right? Especially if you've got an open world style game. But trust me, for now, especially for us building this, entry level kind of game, having a level board-based system is going to make our lives a whole lot easier. Okay, so there we go. Make sure you've got this level set up. And then the next step will be for us to start building our first tile set. Okay, creating a tile set resource. Now, what's interesting about this is there's a couple ways you can go about this. If we already had a tile map layer in here, we could just go to the inspector and add a new tile set to it and then start configuring it. But what we're going to do is we're going to configure the tile set first as a separate resource file. So this tile set's going to live here in our tile sets. And then anytime we add a tile map layer, we can just select that tile set and then start drawing with it. And what's nice about that is if we set it up that way and it's saved in our file system, then anytime we make a new level, we can plop that in there. And if we've made any changes to that tile set, they propagate to every level that uses it, right? So there's some obvious wisdom in doing something like this. And so in a larger game, you'll probably end up with multiple tile sets. You will have tile sets maybe per biome, and you might have tile sets that are specific to certain types of props or background elements or, whatever it is that you're building. And then what you can do is mix and match tile map layers that use those tile sets to accomplish whatever need you have. But for this game, for right now, we're going to have one tile set because we've got that mixed tile set that we're going to be using, right? That sprite sheet that we've created with all of our tiles. And so we can get away with one as we start out. Okay, so let's go ahead and in our tile sets folder, I'm going to right click and say create new resource. And there's a lot of different kinds of resources we could make. I'm just going to search for tile, and you'll see that tile set should be the first or one of the first options that appears. Okay. And I like the description. A tile set is a library of tiles for a tile map layer. That's probably a better description than what I used, but a box of Legos for a board. But here we go. We're going to go ahead and create this tile map layer, and it's kind of asking us what we want to call it. And I'm going to just call mine the Forgotten Forest. If you hadn't noticed, that's kind of like the name of that sprite sheet and whatnot. You could call it forest, you could call it dungeon, just give it a name that maybe makes sense to you. Okay, now you can see we've got our new tile set resource here in our inspector in the file system. And if we double click on it, it's going to open it up in the inspector. I don't even know if you need a double click. Can you single click? Let me try this. Yeah, double click. Yeah, there you go, double click. And actually this time it also opened up the TileSet panel down here below, which if it didn't, if for some reason you're on the output or some other panel down here, once you have a tile set selected, there is an option for the tile set here. This is where we're going to manage and configure our tile set and do a lot of work, okay? In addition to the settings down here in the tile set panel, we've got some settings that show in the inspector when we double click this. And these are different settings, but they correspond to and correlate to each other. And in fact, they dictate how they work. So we want to start here in the inspector. The most important thing that we need to do is set our tile size. You can see by default it's set to 16 pixel by 16 pixel. I guess that's the most common tile size that people use, but I'm a weirdo, and mine's 32 by 32, so I need to update that. And I'll show you why that's important in just a moment. There are a lot of other settings in here that we'll cover, and many of them we'll cover today, but we won't need all of them. But you've got settings to configure our physics, terrain sets. This terrain sets is where we configure our auto tiles. And then features that we're not going to cover in this chapter are navigation layers, which is a layer that's used. It's like a collision layer, but it's instead used to coordinate with the different auto navigation features, pathfinding features that Godot has. Okay, so if you want your levels to have pathfinding built in, then you're probably going to want to learn about the navigation layers. And then we've got custom data layers, where, as it sounds, we can just add custom data types to our tiles. I've used this before. It can be fun for doing things like adding, custom sound effect. I think that one of the coolest things you could do with this is even have like scenes associated with each tile and maybe load a scene when a certain tile is painted, fun stuff like that. And then lastly, we've got rendering settings, which again, we're probably not really going to need these in this chapter, but we'll definitely be covering these first two, the physics and the terrains, and these basic ones. I'll just point out real quick that if you have an isometric game, there are presets for the TileSets and TileMapLayers that work with isometric games. And then we've got half offset square and hexagon shaped. I'm not sure what the half offset square is actually. Have I ever played with that one? I don't know that I have. Half offset square, rectangular tile shape with one row column out of two offset by half a tile. Okay, cool. We're just going to stick with square. Easy peasy. And there we go. Okay, once we've got these settings configured in the inspector, I'm going to go ahead and just save, do a Control S to save. That'll update the file here. Now we're ready to come into our tile set. And real quick, I want to reset my tile size. You don't need to do this. I just want to demonstrate the importance of this. So I'm going to just hit refresh there, save that. Now down in my tile set, what we're going to do next is we're going to come and find our sprite, and we're going to drag it into our tile sources because this sprite sheet that we've created contains all of the tiles that we want to be a part of this tile set. So when we drag and drop it in, it's going to ask you, the atlas texture was modified. Would you like to automatically create tiles in the atlas? And I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah. Okay, but we've got a problem here. And you'll notice, hopefully it's pretty obvious, you can see there are like 4 tiles per tile on mine. Okay, because that setting, that automatic detection of the tiles, was based off of this tile size here, right? So it did 16 pixel by 16 pixel tiles. This is also why it's really important that our tile sets line up with the grid, as I mentioned in the previous video, so that this automatic slicing of tiles works properly. You can come in here and tweak it and do margins and separation and things like that. Okay, so there are advanced ways you can kind of work around it if yours isn't super uniform. But, just to make your life easier, I would just recommend you stick with a grid like we've done. Because I did that wrong, I'm going to go ahead and just select this and delete it. Okay, I'm going to come back over here, I'm going to make sure I've got this. Yeah, okay, I'm going to set this back to 32 by 32. And then I'll just drag in my sprite sheet and get the same question again. Boom. So not only did that create the grid, but another thing you'll notice, some of the tiles are regular bright, and some of them are darkened. Okay, and what that means, if I delete one, right here, for example, that is not considered, the dark squares are not considered a part of this tile set. And you can simply click on it with the left click to add it to the tile set. And so, if there was something here that it didn't detect, you could click to add it, right? Now, generally, how that automatic detection works is Godot is just going to look through, and if you've got pixels within that grid, then it's like, oh, this must be part of the tile set. And in fact, there are some things like these plants, I don't know that I really want them in there, so you could come through, and there's even an erase tool. I could just come through and go, nope, these are not part of this paintable tile set. Okay, you may or may not want to do that. I'm going to go ahead and do that, maybe for these animated ones, but I'll keep the regular, not animated bushes in there. Okay, so that's kind of how we add the initial tiles to our tile set. So with just that, we could actually start painting. And what I want to do is, I know I outlined it that we're going to add Let's set up our tile set, then add a tile map layer. But let's go ahead and add a tile map layer next so we can just see what this is capable of so far. And that'll give us a good indication of what we need to do to make it work moving forward. Okay, so let's do this then. Let's make sure you're in your new level 1, which should be empty at this point. And I'm going to do Control A to add. I'm going to type tile. And if I type it properly, then we'll see our tile map options. Let's just add a tile map layer. There we go. Now you can see that our tile map layer has no tiles, and it says it's because it has no tile set resource, right? That's what this is that we just created, our Forgotten Forest tile set resource. TRES is a text resource, so that's our resource files. It says create or load one, right? So we could come into the tile set. This is what I was mentioning earlier. We could create a new tile set, but then that's going to be saved with and part of this node, and it's not really reusable. So the standard way is to save it. And we can do a quick load, and you can see it's going to show us any tile set resources that it recognizes within our project, and you can add that. Likewise, you could click and drag it and drop it on there, and there we go. Okay, as soon as we did that, you can see this is a slightly different view. It looks a lot like the tile set, but you'll notice down here we're on tile map, not tile set. Tile set is where we're configuring and adjusting the set. Tile map is where we're working with that tile set to paint on our tile map layer. Okay, so getting used to these two different sections can take some time, and it's a little bit confusing at times because the names are so similar. The UI is also very similar, so it can be a little bit confusing. But even with the very minimal work that we've done, just creating that basic tile set, having it automatically slice those tiles into a grid, and then assigning it to this tile map layer, we can come in here and you can see I can click an area. I can click and drag to select multiple tiles. And then if you've got this pencil paint tool selected, and then you have to make sure that you're also on the select mode here for your viewport. If you're on move like I am, then it's going to move, right? So if I get the select mode and I've got paint mode, now you can see that I'm painting with my selection from down here. So I could paint that if I wanted to. Right clicking with the mouse will delete a tile that you're moused over. You can draw a line, which click and drag, and it's going to let you, draw these in a line, which looks kind of funny when I go diagonal like that, right? But there's a line there. In fact, let me just show you something fun. There, I'm going to just draw some top pieces with the line tool. And then maybe I'm like, yeah, I'm going to close this off. You can come in here and fill with the fill tool, and it'll fill with whatever you have selected, right? Which that's hideous, but if you want, you could do it. And it's going to fill tiles that match. In addition, there's the rectangle. So, I mean, I just did that with some lines, but obviously you could just go, oh yeah, I need this whole block of dark tiles right here. Okay. Lots of ways that you can work with this tile set. So far we already have a pretty effective base for being able to draw and add tiles to our level just with what we've done so far, right? While we're here, I'm going to go show you, I've got some of these decorative sections on my tile sheet. So this is a 3 tile wide decorative piece of tile. And let me just grab the regular pencil tool so that we can see it. And how this is designed is it's just supposed to fit in here. And so I'm going to just replace some of these tiles with that, just like that. So you can see we get a little bit of a deformed ground there. And maybe I want this risen one. What's unique about this one is it uses 3 tiles in height because we get the grass going up above, a tile ends right about here. Let me turn on the grid actually. Where's the grid button? Over here, toggle grid visibility. So you can see how some of those tiles go up over the top. Boink. Okay. The grid can be handy, especially if you're trying to measure like jump height or something like that. Like, you can jump 2 or 3 tiles high. But I like it off most of the time. Okay. So you can just come in now that you've got this set up and start painting your initial level. And what I would recommend doing as you're working on this is not only playing around with it, but consider the bounds of your level. And, we don't need to necessarily draw any tiles that fall outside of the bounds of our level. And so this is a good practice in like using some constraint. But obviously, if we've got a left edge, we might want to do something like put one of these corners over here, right? So let me just draw this real quick. And I'm on the eraser tool, common mistake. So when you do that, you're not going to see your selection, obviously. Turn that off, and there we go. Okay, so I've got a little corner. And then maybe what I've got over here, and let me use the rectangle tool or the line tool, is I've just got a wall, you know, on the side. Okay. And I'm just going to get some regular black, fill that in. Okay. So maybe this is the left edge. You can't go that way. So I'm going to build a wall there. And otherwise, you know, maybe the rest of the level's pretty straightforward. So maybe I just drag in some more of this, make it kind of long so we have an opportunity to walk through an environment for a little bit. And let me just level out these black squares down below. You can also come in here with this selection tool, and it will allow you to select tiles within the scene. And so if you need to move something around, you can do that. So select it, click and drag it. All right. And I'm kind of looking at this viewport and saying, okay, if I were to start this level and this was the viewport, where would I kind of want this map to start? And you don't have to position it that way, but it's a good guide, right? So you can go, oh, okay, yeah, this map is about 2 and a little bit viewports wide, and that's just fine. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and, for fun, I'm going to grab one of these sloped areas, grab my draw tool. I'm just going to add one of these in here, which means now I need to kind of take this terrain and bump it up. Okay, and that's a gentle slope. You can see over, how many is that? Like 3 or 4? 4 tiles to the right. We've only really moved up 1. Okay, so it's a gentle slope. I don't want lots of physics or anything in this game, so gentle slopes are fine, because otherwise it could get weird. Okay, let me just finish this out. Let's say this is the end of the level. I'm not going to put a wall here. We'll come back and noodle on this some more later, but there you have it. You've now got tiles that you can draw with, okay? Now, before we move on to the next step, I want to demonstrate why the next step is so important. It'll be obvious when we do it, but let's go ahead and get a player in here. I'm going to just select my level. Shift Control A will allow me to add a scene, right? And I'm going to select a player. There we go. I'm going to just drag my player in here. And I'm going to test this level out by hitting F6. There he goes. Yeah, not working so good, is it? Okay. And by the way, I don't know, we haven't talked about this a whole lot. F6 is this shortcut for this option here to run the current scene. If we hit F5, it's going to run the playground because we had set that as our initial scene. Okay. But obviously we've got an issue with our level. We don't have any collision layers set up with this, right? If we're looking at our playground, all of these sprites have these blue collision shapes. That's what holds our player in there, keeps them from falling through the floor. So I think the next thing we ought to do is configure our tile set to have those collision shapes. And because we're using a resource out here, we can just update that. And if we had drawn 3 levels already with this, it would still work. It would still take the new physics collision layers that we add across the whole game. So what do we need to do to add physics to this? Now you might think that there's some settings here in the TileMapLayer, and there is a physics section, but you can see that we've got like collision enabled or not. And this is handy for other things that we can do. But really right now we can configure, like I was saying, all of our physics within this tile set, okay? And when we have this tile set here, we can select it and we can work on it, and it's going to save those changes out to our resource, since that's the resource that we've got referenced through here, okay? So don't worry about selecting this one to pull up the tile set options. It'll still save it just fine. Okay, so what we need to do in our tile set, you know, if you've got it expanded, or just for sake of making it clear, let's double click our tile set so we only see the tile set options, not the tile map. We can come down here to physics layers, and you can see the option to add an element. This is going to change slightly in 4.6, by the way. I think it's going to become maybe a plus up here. I'm not sure. Now you can see when we added that physics layer, we've now got this new item in here. We've got collision layer settings, and we've got collision mask settings. We've got this, the collision priority, and then we've even got a physics material. We're not really working with physics materials, but this probably looks familiar. If we go back to our playground and we select one of these guys over here, right? Let's look at the static body. Yeah, as you recall, with the static bodies, we went into our collision and we put them on a layer and we put them on a mask. And we did that also for this guy here. So this little static body on our one-way platform is only on layer 2 and has no mask. Okay, that's going to give you an idea of what we're going to do. And actually, in our tile set, not only are we going to configure a physics layer for standard collision, but we've got one-way platforms in here, like this wood. Or if I look down at the bottom, these tiles are intended to be placed in the background, and they're going to be one-way platforms as well. We can work with those, and we can set that all up here in our physics layers. So to start, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the collision mask, because we don't need a collision mask on any of our terrain, but we'll keep this first physics layer set to 1, which is our ground. I'm going to go ahead and add an additional element now. So we'll have 2 collision layers, or two physics layers. I'm going to turn off the collision mask. On the second physics layer, I'm going to take this collision layer and set it to 2, which is our one-way platform collision layer, and turn off 1, okay? So by doing this, we've said that we have 2 different layers for physics detection on this, and now we need to configure which of these tiles corresponds to which of these layers and what their collision shape will be. So let's give this a quick save, and then we can just come over here, make sure we're in TileSet, not TileMap, okay? And there's a couple ways we can work with this, but the easiest method for doing the collisions is to go to this paint properties. There's a select. We can select a tile. We can see things like what physics layer it might be assigned to, as well as some other things, animation, rendering, terrains, lots of stuff. The paint section is the section that's easier to do the editing of this stuff. So when we select paint, you can see that it wants us to select a property editor to paint with. And so we'll come in here, and there's a lot of options. Don't get overwhelmed. Just know that we're looking for physics. We have 2 physics layers. They start at 0. Physics layer 0 is going to be this first physics layer that's on collision layer 1. And then physics layer 1 is going to be the second item, which is on collision layer 2. So let's select physics layer 0. And you can see when we've done that, we get this little painting section. It's got a box. And what we can do is we can come in here and paint with that box. Okay? And just by doing this, I'm going to go ahead and save that. You can't tell right away, but if we come in here to our TileMapLayer, and let's see, hide this. If we go to physics, there is an option. Where is this option? Collision visibility. I'm going to say force show. Ah, there we go. This is sometimes useful in the editor, but you can see, okay, I've got collision layers here, here, and here, because I just painted them in my sheet, right? Hit F6, run it. Okay, cool. That's working until we go off the edge. Let me just run that one more time. It's working, but he's standing on top of the blades of grass, and I want him standing right here, kind of smack dab in the middle of that top plane. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. And we're going to come back to our tile set, and I'm going to adjust this. So when we paint, right, it's going to show us the last tile we clicked on. So I'm going to just start with this one right here, and I'm going to make this panel a little bit larger so that we can see. Now, when we're working with our painting, we can change the shape that we're painting with, okay? So, I mean, you know, this is going to come in handy when we're doing these angled sections and whatnot, but this also comes in handy with our ground. Now, we need to kind of define a rule for us to work with when we're painting. We need to know where the top of this is going to be, and you can see this is pretty inaccurate. Like, I can drag this point just about anywhere. So there's a few things we can do. We can come up here to toggle grid snap if we want. Now, by default, it's on disable snap. There's a half pixel snap, which I don't love because I would prefer that there's a pixel snap in here. For the life of me, I don't know why there's not a pixel snap. There's a grid snap. We could say that our grid is 32 by 32, and now we've got pixel snap turned on, okay? You can see this is snapping to this little tiny grid, right? Alternatively, we could go half that. That means each of these grid lines is of 2 pixels, and I think that's fair because I don't think I need the per pixel accuracy right now. We might need it later. But let's just assume that I'm wanting this guy to be maybe right about there. I don't know. Let me just drag this down. That's 3 grid spaces down, which is 6 pixels. And, oh, I didn't paint it. Now that I've configured it here, I do need to paint it. So I'm going to paint it across the board here. Okay, you can see what that looks like. Let's go ahead and hit F6 to test that. You see what it looks like. And I guess this visibility setting is carrying over to the game, and I really don't want to see it in the game. I'm going to reset that to default. There we go. Now we can see what he looks like. That's a pretty good spot for him to stand, I'd say. Okay, so if you wanted to, you could move that up a pixel. You know, you could adjust it as you see fit. But that's how we can kind of customize the placement of these. Okay, so I'm going back into my tile set. Make sure you're in painting. The other thing that we can do, or maybe want to do, is maybe bring in our collision shapes on the side so that it's not quite on the edge of this. Okay, you can eyedrop a shape. If I eyedrop a shape, then, you know, that might be handy if this one's different than the one I'm currently drawing with. But just looking at this here, I'm just going to drag this in a pixel, and then I'm probably going to drag this one in those 3 spots, so it's kind of like that. Okay, and now I've got a shape there. And some cool things you can do is when you're drawing, if you like this shape and you need it over here, but it's the wrong way, you can press H and that flips it horizontally. If you press the V key, flips it vertically. Okay, so there's a couple quick shortcuts there that you can use. And there's some others that I'm not remembering. Maybe I'll remember some of those. But at this point, we kind of need to come through and just paint all of our tiles and, you know, make sure that they look good. So for example, this side, I'm going to drag this in so that they match up. These edges should be pretty straight. Just flip it horizontally and paint it over here. Now these interior shapes, right? They should be a full shape. You can drag that. There is an option to reset to default tile shape. Boink. Okay. So anything that is totally, completely impassable, you could just come in and paint right away, right? So things like that. Down here, I don't know. Oh man, looking at this, you know, like, dang, all of those are impassable. Okay. And we need to come through and we need to add the collision shapes for all of this stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come through, I'm going to work on this. I'm going to fast forward. I will make a couple comments here and there, but let's just get these physics layers all set up. I'll just note you can add multiple shape or multiple points by clicking on to add them. Okay, so like for this corner here, just add some points, drag them around. You can also right click to delete, or there's some, you know, add and delete point tools here. P is a shortcut for the picker tool. Now this section slopes down and then back up, so I just need the left edge to be the normal height, but then right here in the middle, I can drag that down a bit. Do the same on the opposite side, just flip it horizontally. And I'll be doing basically the opposite up here because it needs to connect to regular height terrain. I'm going to pick a regular piece of terrain and then I'll adjust it. There we go. Now this diagonal piece is a little bit different, a little bit more involved, but we can make it work. You can see I'm about 4 pixels in. I'm setting a piece, which means we're gonna have a tiny, tiny little corner on this one. And that's not even working. On this guy, we're gonna need pixel snapping. So I'm gonna set this to 32. There we go. Boom. Tiny little corner. I probably could have made this go lower and that would have been easier, but whatever. Sometimes I like to pick the most similar shape and then adjust it. I'll set this back to 16 if I can. I don't know if I can or not. Yeah, need it 32. I don't love how small this section is. You can make it kind of bigger, but I mean, you're still limited for the most part, right? Just deal with it. Feel like this could be a bit higher. Yeah, there we go. Now this last one should connect us back up to the regular spot. So that's 3 of these grid pieces down, if I remember, if I'm doing it right. And what is that? 1 up. Okay, so I just got to paint the other side. Technically, I designed this before they really had good support for drawing tiles flipped. So I kind of drew my own mirror. Technically, you probably only need 1/2 of this, you know, unless you need different lighting or different design for the other slope. Oh, wrong one. Where is that one? That's the one I want. There we go. Finished out this main bit of terrain. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to do these auto tile bits. And it's the same process as what I've been doing here. I'm not going to make you watch it, so I'll just skip ahead till those are done. And then we'll talk about one-way platforms. All right, so I've gone through and I've added collision shapes to everything. Now, I am going to mention something that is worth noting for all of you who are following along. You can see how I've set up the collision shapes on our auto tile shapes here. And I've kind of taken a rule of about 3 pixels in from the side for a lot of these things, and that works pretty well. And so I've got some weird little corners and angles in here. That's a lot of work to have to do on these. At the end of the day, if you want it to look this way and you need your collision shapes to match up, it's not that terribly bad. Just make sure you have a good plan in place so you're not having to reconfigure these. But if you had a simpler game where your tiles fill the entire grid, then it's just simply full blocks on all of them. That's going to save you a little bit of time here. Okay, so just kind of a quick note. But I have gone and I've set these up. I've also set up the same kind of collision shapes on this other bit of auto tiled terrain. I've got things here that should be solid, right? These ones are easier. I didn't put the collision shapes in on the edge on these ones so much. They are down on the top so that the player's going to be standing in the middle of the platform there. Okay. Now there are some things that I didn't put collision layers on. This is intended to be a background element right here. These castle-y decorations. Same with this. Trees, props. The player should be able to walk in front of just about all of those. So no collision layer needed on those. But that brings me to both this wooden platform here and then this guy here. These are intended to be one-way platforms that the player can jump up through and down from. And so we need to configure those. And we've already set up our collision layer and we've talked about where that resides. So we can just come in here to physics layer 1. And actually before, well, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so with physics layer 1, let's start with this wooden beam. It's a little bit simpler. We could just paint this on here, but you'll notice that these are missing something. They don't have that one-way platform setting, but there is this one-way down here. And if I make this wider, you can read it. Polygon 0, one way. So I'm going to turn that on. And then when I redraw, now you can see the arrows indicating the one-wayness of those platforms. But of course, it might be worth tweaking this to match. So I'm going to turn on my grid snapping. I'm going to set this to 32 so that or 16, I guess, is what we were mostly doing. Okay, get this to match. And just zoom in, make sure I bring this top down right about there. 1, 2, 3, whoop, whoop, whoop. And then we don't really need them to be the full height either. It doesn't make too much of a difference, but I'm just going to make them small. Okay, there we go. Now we've got one-way platform set up on that. And I can just reuse that same shape on these bits here. And that should be sufficient, okay? If there were any other one-way platforms that you have in your tile map, you just go ahead and paint them with this other physics layer, and we should be good to go. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and add a one-way tile map, and we'll test. In fact, before we do that, let's just click on the force to show these. And you can see that we've got a slope happening here. Here, go away, brush. We've got this slope happening here. It's really faint right there, but you can see we've got an angle going up. And if you're on Godot 4.5 or later, like I am, then you'll see that it's created one large mesh. And so these lines that you're seeing here are just the triangulation used to kind of make those angles and cuts in the mesh happen. Okay, so you don't have to worry about those. Prior to this version, this just would have been a series of individual collision shape boxes. So this is a good optimization that they've implemented here into the latest versions of Godot. Okay, so let's run this. And I'm going to do one more thing here, one more little tangent. I'm going to make this scene, level 1, my new default scene. So I'm going to go into the project settings. And then here under run, I'm just going to clear this. Now you can select a scene that you want it to run, like going in here and selecting scene 1. Alternatively, I canceled. You can just come out here and if we try and run the game or the project, it's going to say, hey, do you want to use, well, it says we don't have, right, a default scene, and there is an option to select the current one. So there we go. Now when we run our project, it's going to run this scene. Okay. And we can see that, he's working. He's going on these slopes. We do have an issue with our camera not following the player. I'm not going to get into that today because there's a lot to get through in this video. So just for the sake of showing these slopes here, let me just drag this whole tile map over and we'll run it again. And voila. Okay. Nice, easy slopes. They seem to be working just fine. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and reset the transform of this back to 0, 0, like it was. And then let's paint in some of those one-way platforms so we can see how they work. Now we can put the one-way platforms on this layer, okay, and that's going to be fine. In fact, we'll start with the wood and we'll do that. So just make sure you go to Tile Map, find these one-way platforms here, and then just pick a spot. Make sure you got the right combination of tools selected. And let's say you've got little wooden platforms here that the player can jump on, okay? But turn off the force show. Now when we run, we'll have these platforms I can jump on, and you can see they're working like one-way platforms, and I can crouch and jump through them. So it's really quite simple and pretty handy to set these tile sets up, to be able to use them. Now let's look at another use case here in just a second where we want to use this other one-way platform that's supposed to be behind the tile map layer. We'll look at that, and I'll show you some issues and how to resolve them. The type of one-way platform I'm talking about now, of course, if I go to tile map and I select my tile map layer, I've got this little misty piece of ground down here. And let's say you're like, oh yeah, I like that. I want some of this right here. Well, that just took a chunk out of my regular terrain, didn't it? And we don't want that. Now, what's great, this is called TileMapLayer for a reason, because we can have multiple of them. We could duplicate this layer. That's going to duplicate everything we've drawn, and then we're going to have to clear it. So you can do that, or you could just do Control A, add a new tile map layer, and then here just make sure we quick load that Forgotten Forest tile map. Okay, now when I draw with this, you can see it's on top of, but didn't delete the ground here. So I'm going to go ahead and add a few things that we can reuse here. And in fact, this is designed so that we can even have like a tall skinny thing, boink, like that. That's about as skinny as it can get. And these bottom pieces, if you're using mine, they're designed to just keep being seamless all the way down. Okay, the fade happens over the first two tiles, and then the third tile is a solid color. Okay, now obviously this is in front of, but the simplest way to control the stacking of these is just to adjust the order of them here in our scene tree. So if we move the tile map layer to the bottom, then it'll be on top. And voila, there we go. Now we've got this little thing happening here. I'm going to go ahead and come in actually to my top tile map layer, and I'm going to delete some of those wooden platforms. So now we've got multiple layers that we can use. Okay. And let's go ahead and just test this real quick. Make sure that they are indeed working. Except our player's behind it. Okay, but they're working, right? They're stacking properly. Now this is fun. If you wanted the player to be able to go behind, then you're welcome. I showed you how. There are going to be situations, however, where we want a tile map layer to always be on top or always be behind, regardless of the order in which they're stacked here. And I would say the same is true for the player. And there's one common setting that we can use in a 2D game that's going to control that, and it works on just about any kind of node. And I'm going to demonstrate that first with the player. I'm going to go ahead and open my player scene because I want this to be the default setting for my player. And when I select the player root node, if I come down in the inspector, you're going to find a section for ordering. It's under the canvas item. And you can see that we have a z-index of 0. What the z-index is it controls the order in which the node is drawn. And so if we want something to always be on top of our tile maps, if we simply set the player's z-index to 1, then when I hit F5 and run the project, you'll see that he will be once again on top. Because now he's on a z-index that's higher. So it doesn't matter what his order is in the scene tree, with that setting he's on top. There are also options in here to have Z as relative, which is on by default. That's what makes it so that we can move them up and down in the scene tree and get that layer stacking. And likewise, if you wanted this TileMapLayer 2 to be in the background, but for some reason it's below it, you could come in here and change the Z-index order to -1. I'm not going to do that for this one because I think it's handy to keep them ordered in an order that makes sense. But in future episodes in this chapter, we will use some z-index to put things in the background that are far in the background, or even things in the foreground that will be in front of the player. Okay, one item I actually almost forgot because it wasn't on my blackboard, but it was something we discussed. When we look at our tile map layer here, ignore these other ones. I recorded something out of order to just, it is what it is. I've got in here, let's go down to, where am I? Let's extend the tile set. Now, one thing we haven't talked about yet, we did physics layers, but we didn't do terrain sets. And it sounds like train sets. And I say it like train sets probably too much, but terrain sets is what we're talking about here. I'm going to go ahead and add an element, and we're going to talk about this. What the terrain set is used for is for these auto tiling tiles that we've set up, okay? But you can see we've got some options. We've got a mode for match corners and sides, match corners, and match sides. By default, it's set to match corners and sides. It's the more accurate or complex version of terrain matching modes. And then down here, you can see we've got terrains. So let's go ahead and add an element to our terrain set. And I'm going to give this first one a color of kind of like maybe a green color, kind of a bright green. I'm going to use that for our grass. And then you might think that we'll add another terrain set for this here, but technically that's going to be part of this terrain, or at least we can do that. So I'm going to add another one. And the second one, I'll give it a bluish color, so it'll be more distinct. And we're going to use that for these here. Okay, you could add another terrain down here as well, but and it can have different settings, but really this is what we need. And if you want, you can give these terrains a name, like that's called just terrain 0, right? So you could call it like grass terrain, and then we could call this other one the stone terrain, something like that, right? And then once we've set these up here, right, those are saved in our tile set, then we can come over here to the TileSet editor, and underneath paint, there's going to be some options for us. We can select terrains. Then we have to select which terrain set we want to use. So I'm going to pick the first one, and then we can pick a terrain type. So we've got grass terrain and stone terrain. Let's start with the grass. And what you can see here is all of the tiles in our tile sheet have this little dash. That means they're not part of this terrain. But if I want to add them, I can simply click. And so I'm going to add all of the grass terrain items by just clicking and dragging and filling this in real quick. Okay, so now these are part of the terrain. However, they won't actually be paintable just yet. We need to configure them one step further before we can use them. And I'm going to go ahead and change this mode setting a little bit so you can see. But by default, you can see as I hover over a tile on this terrain, I've got these quadrants. It's 3 rows and 3 columns, or 3 columns and 3 rows, right? Okay, so 9 squares. The center square represents the terrain item itself, and then the side and corner pieces represent its connection or relation to neighboring terrain or grid items. Now, if I were to change this from match corners and sides to match corners, then you can see that this changes, and we only have these corner options, right? We've got the center, and then we've got the corners. Now, I'm trying to think which type of style this is most useful for, but obviously this isn't useful for everything. This is probably good for things like isometric. I'm not 100% sure. Matching sides is similar. It just does up, down, left, and right matching, okay? But you also can still select the center one. But what we want is match corner and sides. That's what this blob is designed to support. And so how this works is if we draw just one terrain and it has nothing surrounding it, then we've got this, right? We discussed this in the last video. And you remember, let me go ahead and pull up that example real quick. This auto tile template shows that exact same grid, sides and corner matching pattern that we need to essentially paint out for this to work. So you can use this as a reference as you go painting. Otherwise, I'm going to go through and I'm just going to paint over it real quick, and then we'll talk about it when I'm done. Okay, so as we paint this, you can see it inherits the color we've assigned here, and you can right click to remove. So I'm going to just start. Pretty much every tile should have a center tile, and then they connect. And this can be pretty easy to make mistakes, and it's going to cause it to draw wrong, but it's easy to correct. You just want to iron out the kinks before you start creating huge levels. You can see this guy completely surrounded, as is this one here. Now, if you wanted, you could leave one of these out, and then it just wouldn't select that to paint. Okay, I think I've got it all laid out. Now that went pretty quick for me because I've done this multiple times, but essentially you should end up with a pattern kind of like this, right? And this is going to inform how these items are automatically drawn when we start painting with this terrain. So with that, I'm going to save this, and I'm going to come in here and select my tile map layer, make sure I'm in the tile map mode. We have a terrains tab, and you can see we've got our stone terrain and our grass terrain. Stone terrain hasn't been defined yet, but the grass terrain has. So when we select this and select the drawing tool, boom. You can see that it's using those rules and those matching things to automatically update them. Even works when we delete a tile. This will work with line drawing. It'll work with using the rectangle tool. And perhaps I have an issue with one of my items there. It looks like I do. So let's go ahead and go back and inspect that in the tile set. Okay, which one of these did we mess up today, Mike? It's always something. Look at this. See, these ones don't have the center selected. Let's add that in there. I don't think I made any other mistakes. Unfortunately, fixing this won't automatically update what you've drawn, because once these tiles are drawn, it's like kind of a done deal. They will update, however, if we come into our tile map and start drawing again, right? If I delete and add, oh, there it goes. Boom. Looks like I might still have a little bit of an issue popping up there. Or maybe it was just remembering wrong. I'm not sure. Okay, so there we have it. Yeah, it's looking like it's working. Oh, I got it to happen again. Okay, let's check out that tile set one more time. And maybe this is a good point in which we want to compare it with the, oh, look, right here, some more miss in the middle. So sloppy, Mike. So stinking sloppy, man. We're going to have to feed to the fishes, you know what I mean? Okay, save that. Come back to tile map, grass terrain. Please work, or I'm getting fed to the fishes. You heard Big Tony. I don't know why I'm suddenly in this mode. There we go. Okay, cool. So you can use this tool to draw these automatic tiling terrains. And then obviously, because we've got a secondary one set up for stone terrain, we can come in here to our tile set and then switch our terrain over to stone. And now we can paint in the exact same thing on our stone, which is not tedious and super fun. But, of course, then we'll be able to come in and do this. So I'm going to do this real quick as well. Okay, I think I got this one configured better than the last one. I'm hoping I don't have those same issues. Drawing these matching things out on this guy with these more organic looking tile sets is kind of a pain in the butt, right? Oh, the price we pay for beauty. But there we go. So now with this, I'm going to save that. I can come back to my tile map. Now my stone terrain's got stuff in here, and should be able to draw with it. Nice. Super nice. It looks really nice, Nigel. You can draw like hollow boxes with little things, and you can draw a single tile. Lots of cool stuff. Now, this kind of terrain is super, super useful for quick iteration in platforms. It's a little bit harder to make it look quite as nice as the other way, but I mean, obviously these still look pretty good, right? I don't really have any complaints about them. So just use them however you see fit and however you like. And you don't have to use the exact same blob layout as I have here. You can find other options and you might prefer those, but you do you, find out what works for you, and go ahead and build your terrains. Now, one last comment, I guess, about terrains. I'm not going to be doing this here. You can create really complicated terrains that overlap with each other. So for example, you'll notice that if I go to my tile set, oh, I was already there. If I'm in my tile set and I'm painting with stone terrain, you see how I can paint stone on my grass? Aha. So you can get really complicated. You can say, if this tile is grass and the left tile is grass and the bottom tile is grass, but the right tile is stone, maybe you have a whole new set of tiles that can maybe help transition from one tile type to another or something like that, right? I'm going to go ahead and remove those because that's not what's happening here. We don't need to do that for most games, but for those of you who really love crafting your tiles and you want to work on that, then that's an option that you have available to you if you want to make these transitions between different tile types. Okay, technically, we've done all of these things. I'm going to just demonstrate one last thing that we can do with this before we wrap up the video. And so to do that, let's go back to scene 1. And I'm going to add yet another layer. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and this time I'm going to duplicate this TileMapLayer 2 by hitting Control D. And then I want to just show a couple settings as I'm working on this. When we have multiple TileMapLayers, it can be hard to decipher which one we're on. You can use this, in fact, that's even more confusing, right? Because both TileMapLayer 3 and 2 have these things drawn. So when I was changing the visibility, it didn't appear to work, even though it did. But we can turn on, there's a setting over here. You see this little stack looking thing? It's got like a little bing highlight there. Highlight selected TileMapLayer. When we turn that on, then the TileMapLayer that we're drawing on gets drawn normal and everything else gets faded with some kind of color. Obviously, since this one is on top of layer 2, we're not seeing it too well, but I'm going to go ahead and select TileMapLayer 3. I can see that I've selected it. And then I'm going to grab the rectangle and set it to erase. I'm just going to erase everything. There we go. Okay. So now I've got a clean layer. That's one way you can, duplicate. Then I don't have to assign the tile set. It's already assigned. But I want to just draw a few props. We're not going to get into major background props because we'll be doing that in a future episode where we deal with parallax layers. But for now, we will want to maybe add a few decorations. We're not going to do the animated one yet either. That'll be for, again, another future episode. But let's say you just want to add a few bushes or trees. And when I draw with these, you're going to notice something that I had mentioned in my previous video, and it has to do with ordering. So if I paint with this tree, I don't love it being on the grid like this. Now, you don't have to paint these with a tile map layer. You could use them as a texture for a sprite and just use a texture region to access that particular piece. And we will be doing that in later episodes. But let's say you do want to use these from the tile map layer because it's a pretty convenient way to draw props. And I would say you probably should do that with most props. Let's add a rock in here. Because of the way these are set up, we've got an issue because all of these bushes and plants and trees are just kind of floating, maybe with the exception of putting one right there behind that bumped up piece of ground. Okay. Like this isn't quite what I want. But what's fun is I can take this TileMapLayer 3 with my props on it and we can move it. We can move it around. And so really what we want, instead of having to draw these all with a specific offset in our tile map and our tile sheets that we're creating in Sprite, because that can be kind of a pain too, we can just drag this. We can just drag it down. An example of this is I just put it down 6 pixels. Maybe I know it's about 8 or whatever. Actually 6 looked really good. I'm going to put it back to 6. And now you can see that it's sitting right on top of the ground just a little bit. And I think maybe even 4 might be a little bit more appropriate. Now, because of how we've ordered this, these plants are behind. If I were to put them up here above that tile map layer, then they'll be above everything. Okay. And they look pretty good. Generally, I think I want to use these mostly to be behind, actually. It's kind of how I prefer to use them. So I'm going to go ahead and just drag them to be the back layer there. And if you want, you can even offset them to the left or right a little bit so that you get a little bit less uniform looking placement of all of these props. Okay. So as you're thinking about how to be creative, think that you don't have to use these tile sets all in the same way. So let's just draw a couple more bushes, or maybe this fun rock right here. Right. You can come in here and figure out where you want to place that. If I stick it over there, it's actually kind of behind the level, which is kind of cool. And one last thing that I'll show you as we're drawing these, let's presume for a moment that you wanted to add some bigger decorations. I've got things like this castle wall section that you can use. So, if you want to draw some of this stuff in there, you can, right? So maybe instead of a tree or rocks over here, you want like this bit of castle wall like that. And then you could put a top on it. Okay. You could, and I'm not highly recommending this because you have to be careful because this is going to look, but you could put a piece of ground in here and say you want that in the background. The player can't jump on it. If you do this, you're probably going to want to take this layer and modulate it, which if we modulate a tile map layer, it's going to color all of the tile sheets on it. So like if we brighten it up or darken it like this, okay, then it'll color all of those. You could even add a little bit of color to it if you want, like maybe a little bit of bluish tint would be good. That'll help push it into the back. But let's say that this piece of ground you also don't want the player to jump on, but it's already configured. It's going to be collidable. Like if I run this right now, visually it looks good, but look, the player's bumping into it, and that's not what I wanted, right? I took a chunk out of that castle. Got to fix that. We'll ignore that. You guys can fix that if you did that. But what we can do to fix this, we can take TileMapLayer 3, and there is the ability to change some options on this. So scroll up. Let's go all the way up to the top. You can see there's an enabled. That will disable it or enable it, which will also not render it. But there is an option here under physics where we can disable the collision. By default, the collision's enabled. But if we disable collision and run it one more time, now that terrain and that tile map is in the background, okay? So you can get really creative with your tile maps using the things I've shown. Change their position, modulate them, turn off collisions if you need to use something that has collisions. So that's your homework assignment. Take your level and make it look as beautiful as you want, and make it large. Right now I'm constrained because my camera is just sitting in a certain spot, right? And the camera's not moving with the player, but in the next episode, we're going to bind the camera to the player so it follows him. And in the process, we're going to run into some issues where our camera is going to go outside the level bounds, and we'll fix those. But in order for that to be useful, you're going to need a level that's large enough to justify having camera movement, okay? So build out your level, decorate it, do what you can, just have fun and get familiar with the tile map tools. And go ahead and comment below if there's anything new that you learned, if there's any questions that you have, or anything that you really want me to cover in relation to these tile maps. That doesn't mean I'll get to it in chapter 2, but I'll certainly take notes. And of course, if you're new to my channel, go ahead and subscribe so that you can see what's coming next. You'll be able to know when I'm doing my next episode, which should be pretty soon. And if you want to support me even further, I have a Patreon. If you find my Patreon link below, you can join. You'll have access to some additional assets as well as the full project files in a unique GitHub repository. Now that's specific to the Pixel Adventurer tier on Patreon, who has access to the GitHub repository. Go ahead and consider that if you want to throw money at me. Otherwise, please come back, continue to follow my videos, give me a like so that other people know that it's maybe worthwhile. And as always, we'll see you next time.